Sawadika. My name is Darcy Neal, and I'm a board member and one of the UN reps for the Temple of Understanding. I was privileged to spend many years in Asia, and two specifically in Thailand as the Peace Corps country director. It's a while ago, so that's the extent of my Thai language. I'd like to welcome each of you to our Eco Justice for All dialogue series. And today we're titled The Ordination of a Tree, Engaging the Rights of Nature. The series is part of an ongoing program of the Temple of Understanding, which is a 63-year-old interfaith NGO whose mission is to advocate for interfaith values in the secular setting of the United Nations and around the world. Our focus for the past 12 years has been to increase awareness of the global impact and what is required of leaders and actors in the climate crisis, particularly their impact in achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, notably peace, justice, women's health and safety, food sovereignty, and ensuring a healthy planet for all. It is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First is Sue Darlington. Sue is the president, retired, of Deep Springs College and Professor Emerita, which I love, of Anthropology and Asian Studies at Hampshire College, and also the author of a wonderful book called The Ordination of a Tree. Hans van Willenswaard, hope I got that right, is from the Netherlands, but in Thailand with the Right Livelihood College in Bangkok, and also involved with I books. Alberto Saldamando is part of the Rainforest Action Network, as a board member, and also with the Indigenous Environmental Network. Alberto will be our moderator today, and I'll turn it over to you, and perhaps you want to enhance some of your biographies. I just did the bare bones. So over to you, Alberto.
Well, thank you very much for that brief but nice introduction. I actually, the one thing I would add is that much of my work is with regard to climate change and the protection of the environment within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and now the Paris Agreement. I would ask people to, if they have questions, to use the chat, and we'll be looking at the chat throughout and see if some of the panelists can answer that. But I'd like to start with Susan reading a quote from her book that hopefully sets the tone for our discussion. So Susan, would you please?
Absolutely. Thank you both for the introduction. And I'll just mention very quickly that the focus of my research for the last 30-some years has been on Buddhism and environmental anthropology, and the intersections between those fields of Buddhist studies and environmentalism. So the quote, Thai Buddhist monks wrap orange clerical robes around trees to protect forests. Ordaining a tree is a provocative ritual that has become the symbol of a small but influential monastic movement aimed at reversing environmental degradation and the unsustainable economic development and consumerism that fuels it.
Thank you very much. I do think it does set a tone. And I was going to ask the panelists if they could, how do you relate your work to climate change and the protection of the environment? And perhaps Hans could begin that discussion.
Yes, so I think this is a very interesting phenomenon. It is part of a Buddhist religion, but it has a universal meaning, and you can try to interpret it from the traditional point of view, and then it is also very close to indigenous worldviews, that nature is sacred and cannot be treated as a commodity. So if there are attempts to use the forest for economic gain, let's say, there is this beautiful gesture of ordaining the trees to protect them. Now, in a more contemporary and universal sense, it is, ordaining is a part of creating a sangha. And that is one of the three core elements of Buddhism: the Dhamma, the Buddha, and the Sangha. And the Dhamma refers to the law, and the Buddha to the capacity of personal liberation, and the Sangha stands for community. And in a narrow sense, that is the monastic community, but in a wider sense, it is community in general. And I think, so what the monks try to do, this protection of the tree, in fact, is resonates with contemporary movements to what we call reclaiming the commons. And that is really a movement coming up more and more, and refers in an academic sense to Eleanor Ostrom, who said, beyond state and the market. So we have to create space by ordaining that space, by reclaiming it as sacred in a secular way, in a way. Yes? It's not, Buddhism is not a religion anyhow, but it manifests as a religion like any other religion, but in fact it's a secular philosophy. And so this reclaiming our space, our earth, as a sacred space, and as a commons, something we share also with other living beings, sentient beings. That is something that is the core challenge of today for humanity, and all the whole triple crisis and violence and economic inequality and so on. It all hangs together, but the core path towards solution also, and that's what the Lord Buddha also tried to teach, is that we have to reclaim the earth as something sacred and something we share in the spirit of the commons. And I think the tree ordination is really a beautiful symbol of how we can do that at the micro scale, but also how we can do that at the macro scale. Maybe my last opening remark is that so we work now in a working group on Earth Trusteeship. And that goes back, Gandhi also talked about trusteeship, but more in a legal sense to Judge Veeramantri, who was a deputy president of the International Court of Justice, and who emphasized the importance of trusteeship as a new approach to ownership, let's say. Yeah? So nowadays there's a lot intention to create steward ownership, and this is very similar to trusteeship. Trusteeship is a legal connotation, so that's why it is quite powerful in principle. But so this new space, this commons, needs a legal basis, and that is what we promote as can be called earth trusteeship. So all people are trustees of the earth, and we share the earth in the spirit of the commons. So
well,
I'm very grateful to Suzanne that she really studied this phenomena, because it could get lost, let's say. It's still practiced. It's still powerful, but it's very important that it is well documented, and that it is carried on as a universal symbol also.
Mm. Oh, thank you, Hans. That's a nice way of thinking about the tree ordination and broadening it out beyond Buddhism, beyond Thailand, the symbolism of it. I came into this originally studying monk doing alternative rural economic development in the 80s. And that was during the rise of the environmental movement in Thailand. And I became very curious about the role of monks and how they might navigate the challenge of growing environmental problems and increasingly with climate change, especially when you have the idea in Buddhism that there is no self, and that many people think of the goal, the primary goal, as removing yourself from the cycle of rebirth and thus removing yourself from the world. And I became fascinated by the monks who had a different interpretation. And they said, if you're going to relieve suffering and you have to do this for all sentient beings, not just an individual. And this includes the interaction with nature, that humans and nature are codependent. We can't live without it. And so the monks came up with this idea. It was actually inadvertent. There was a monk who was trying to help villagers in northern Thailand save their forest from loggers. The government kept giving concessions. And he was also saving their water. So he did a rite to sort of bless the waterways that they were dependent on, and then chose to do a consecration ceremony of the largest remaining tree and put a lot of new trees, small seedlings around the tree that was getting blessed. And the villagers are the ones who referred to these trees as they took them and planted them and had to take care of them as ordained. So it wasn't even a term that came out of the monks themselves, but very much from the local people. And the monks just embraced that concept and used the right. I mean, this particular monk was called crazy. There was a journalist in Bangkok who said he should be disrobed, kicked out of the sangha, the monastic sangha, and yet people loved him and went to him and said, no, he's onto something. We are codependent with nature. We need the trees just as much as the trees need us. And the trees are symbolic of the larger forest, the water, the animals, the atmosphere, extending it out. So I think Hans, your relationship, you're relating this to the idea of the commons is really a good one, because that's kind of what the monks were doing. They weren't trying to be controversial and technically ordain these trees. They don't consider the trees monks. They're using it as a symbolic idea that just as the lay people need the monks for spiritual guidance, and the monks need lay people for their support, both physical and in order to be monks, that humans need nature for physical support and guidance, and nature needs humans for protection, not destruction. And so as the climate situation has gotten worse over the decades, I've really marveled at all of the grassroots efforts to make us aware of this relationship. And I've been pleased to see that the tree ordinations continue in various places, and they've spread beyond Thailand. For example, a couple of years ago, a group of Buddhists and academics in Northampton, Massachusetts, ordained a number of cherry trees along a major road because the town wanted to expand the road. And they did this to try to make local people realize these trees were valuable. Yes, they were planted by humans. They were not naturally there, but that they had grown and provided shade and food. Unfortunately, they got cut down anyway, but the effort and the expansion of doing that in the United States, where they borrowed it from Thailand, but it's done in many parts of the world now, or culturally appropriate adaptations in different parts of the world. And so my hope is that this helps all of us recognize how much we depend on nature and we need to protect it.
Well, thank you very much. I guess I should answer my own question as well. I work with the Indigenous Environmental Network, primarily in climate change and through the Framework Convention on Climate Change process, and now the Paris Agreement as well. And what we try to do, accomplish there, is advocate for the protection of the earth and advocate for real solutions. Right now, the states are really taken with the idea of carbon capture and all these other kinds of mechanisms that would only allow them to continue to pollute. They use an offset system where they put a price on carbon. And so they use it to offset what the real emissions should be. Then they offset it with these carbon credits and carbon offsets that really only allow them to continue to pollute more. So all these false solutions really avoid the question of, should we just reduce emissions without regard to offsets, just reduce emissions at source and stop from really polluting the atmosphere and creating more carbon. We have with the Rainforest Action Network, we actually have reports of banks that pollute, that finance the polluters. Wells Fargo, Citibank, Bank of America, really the same old, are financing pipelines. They're financing even coal production. China itself is financing coal production in Africa, even though it's not coal production in China, so they can't really say it's theirs. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of double standards and kind of, looking for the pea under the nutshell, the walnut shell. But those are the kinds of games that they're playing at the expense of humanity. So we try to make those points across, that the forests need to be preserved for their own sake and not as carbon sinks that can be used as offsets. That we really need to reduce emissions at source. And part of that too is we work with interfaith groups. There's an interfaith group within the Framework Convention that do not really are not an interest group as defined by the convention, but work very strenuously really to keep the oil in the ground and to keep and preserve the environment. In fact, I think their spokesperson last year was a Buddhist. So we work in tandem. We don't work together, but we work in tandem really to achieve those ends. But so that's really my work as it relates to climate change. But I was really taken with Hans's and this discussion of the spiritual values with regard to preserving the environment. I was particularly taken with the issue of Indigenous peoples' core beliefs. Let me see. But unlike book religions, for Indigenous peoples, it's not a matter of religion, but the practice of our spiritual lives. Our songs, our dance, our drum is our spiritual practice that connects us to Father Sky and Mother Earth. It is all related to our traditional lives, our buen vivir. We receive our instructions from Father Sky and Mother Earth. They tell us when to plant, when to rotate our crops, when to gather our medicines, when to heal our relationship with the earth. Our sweat lodges are one practice of healing, of welcoming our future generations. There was an interesting documentary on on PBS a couple of days ago, really about Chaco Canyon and Pueblo Bonito, which was constructed constructed a wall going east to west. It at the end of right at the equinox, it would cast no shadow. And that was their connection. They had a belief of the 6 directions, not only the horizontal east, west, north, and south, but the up and the down. And that connected them to the sky, and that connected them to the earth. And so they use their constructions in many regards, not just the wall, but other constructions throughout the Pueblo Bonito that really looked at the weather, looked at used architecture, their architecture to make those spiritual connections. So it's not just a matter of ceremony, but really a matter of their constructions. It was kind of interesting that made those connections. And apparently, according to this documentary, and I think it's true. I mean, it's true for North America, or Turtle Island, but also those beliefs extend not only from North America, Turtle Island, to Abayala, and South America. They've found Mexican cacao in Argentina and in Mapuche territories in the south. So that really established a connection throughout the Americas of indigenous peoples. The languages, some languages are very similar, but thousands of miles apart. So I think those spiritual values have really led more to the guardianship of the earth, the role of indigenous peoples in protecting the earth, but not dominating it as the Bible would tell us to do, but working as one aspect of the web of life that includes our relatives, those that walk, those that crawl, those that fly, the four-leggeds. They're our relatives. In fact, the buffalo, the Lakota call the buffalo buffalo man, buffalo woman. They consider them part of themselves, their identity. And that really is very much a part of indigenous thinking too. I think, at least from my perspective, that the identity with the earth is super important to make sure that the balance is maintained between the earth, the needs of man, and the needs of the earth, the environment. And if it requires us not hunting for a while, or not planting or restoring the soil, we do that because it does restore that balance. So those are my observations. I'm kind of out of question, but
I have an interesting connection between what you're
Good.
saying and something
Good.
that Hans said about the idea of using legal concepts. And that's the movement now. I think it began in New Zealand, where the Maori got the state of New Zealand, the government, to recognize a river as having personhood and thereby the legal rights of any person. And that has spread. There's a couple of rivers in India now that have personhood, although the legal ramifications are a bit different. I want to say, you can correct me, I think it was Ecuador that gave nature personhood. So there's a connection between that, in so many indigenous cultures around the world that see aspects of nature as equal to themselves and critical, and then using the contemporary legal system to try to get those who don't hold these beliefs to held responsible for taking care of it. It's a tricky argument, and it's in Thailand, as I mentioned, the monk who ordained the first ordained trees was called crazy because they said a tree is not a human and therefore cannot be ordained, because the Buddha was very clear that only humans, and at his time initially only men, could ordain and achieve awakening. So there was a lot of critique of, are you claiming the trees have personhood? So it's a very delicate balance, because the monks had to say, no, this is just symbolic, but it's symbolic in a way that does make people stop and think. And I think this legal argument around the world of giving aspects of nature, legal rights of personhood, is not claiming in the legal sense that they are actual humans, but that they have to be recognized as having the same rights because we can't live without them. So it's a really interesting connection between the sort of spiritual connections that you're articulating, Alberto, and the idea of using this legal concept of earth trusteeship that Hans mentioned. And I think for me personally, that feels like a really valuable direction to go. It's a little tricky because people have different belief systems and they don't all make room for that, unfortunately. But even within Christianity, you see divisions where people say, oh, no, there's dominance. You know, God created the earth for humans. And then you see another side that really emphasizes stewardship and is seeing the whole earth as God's creation and beginning to tap that spiritual element of taking care of and needing and respect to respect. So to me, seeing the dialogues go in that direction is really, really exciting and important and needs to be carried forward strongly.
No, that's very true. There was an important conference in Cochabamba several years ago about the rights of Mother Earth. And there was a declaration also with regard to the rights of Mother Earth. But in fact, it really turns out to be more of duties of us really taking steps to protect Mother Earth as opposed to the rights of Mother Earth. So the rights of Mother Earth are very dependent on our, for every right, there's a duty. I mean, there's, laws against murder, don't kill anybody. That's the duty. And that's what, with regard to the rights of Mother Earth, we really have duties, a duty to protect Mother Earth from harm, including exploitation, including extraction. I mean, the Uwas and other farms, other indigenous peoples consider oil the blood of Mother Earth that should not be disturbed. Unfortunately, at the time, the Colombian rebels were assassinating people like that. And that's another problem we have, really, is the assassination and criminalization of human rights defenders of the earth.
Yeah.
It's a very large problem. Disproportionate numbers are journalists and defenders are indigenous peoples. And that's another thing we try to raise the issue within not only the confines of the UNFCCC, but outside as well, is at least draw attention to the problem and try and support frontline communities whenever they're under any kind of attack or siege, or their leadership. We often do urgent actions and things like that. But it is a problem that actually needs to be known more and really discussed more.
Well, I think it needs to be addressed about the root causes of it too, which gets back to the idea of capitalism. Yeah. And the quote from my book that we read is the idea that so much of the destruction of the earth, of nature, is driven by the desire for money, the desire for profit for those that are undertaking it. And this is another element of ordaining a tree is a ritual. It's a symbolic aspect, but as the monks who are really involved in it would point out to you, if you don't have the larger education program and thinking about what are the economic factors that lead to the destruction of the earth and the destruction of humans, then a ritual, a spiritual ritual in itself is not going to do anything. So, for example, in 2006, there was a monk who was assassinated because he was working with local villagers in Chiang Mai in northern Thailand to protect their land, both their rice paddy and also the forest surrounding it from the expansion of tangerine plantations that were being driven mostly by foreign investors. And he was stabbed during the night. Someone came in and There's been an investigation of his murder, but all the evidence vanished. The investigation never led anywhere. And I think it's a typical case because those who stand to benefit from the expansion of the plantations financially often, I mean, the belief is that they've used their funds to influence the police, to influence anyone else looking into the case. And that's repeated around the world where these cases don't ever come to resolution because somebody is threatened in terms of their power and
That's right.
their finances. So to me, it's the monks are on track by thinking, how do we use these kinds of spiritual symbols, rituals to tap people's consciences, but also tie it to practical activities to make us think, how do we have to change the way we live in order to achieve these goals of taking care of the earth?
That's right.
And make it more equitable across humanity as well as across nature. And that's very difficult to do. You're challenging some people with a lot of power, but it's worth it. It's important to keep trying. So but there has to be a practical element to it.
No, that's true. And that also goes to a matter of core beliefs, as well as we've been discussing earlier. Our beliefs have to change, I think, and that's really harder.
Mm-hmm.
You have all these MAGA Christians that believe that nothing is sacred. So, but I was thinking as you were speaking of rivers are alive. They not only
Absolutely
are the source of life, but they are alive. I think there was a story. I went to accompany the community when Berta Cáceres was assassinated. I was there for a couple of weeks, accompanying the new leadership. And one story her mother told me was that, well, they told me actually, there was a very hostile journalist, a right-wing journalist, interviewing her. And he asked her, well, what makes you think you're going to win? Like a sarcastic tone. And she said, because the river told me. And I think that's rivers are alive and they do communicate. Her mother told me that it sounded like little girls when they spoke to her. But Hans, I was wondering if you had any reflections on this turn of events, this economic basis for the exploitation of the earth. Particularly, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about the role of colonialism in the destruction of the earth as an economic force. I don't know if that's an appropriate question, but if you could reflect on that, I would very much be interested.
Yeah, the situation we are in is a result of centuries of mismanagement, misbehavior already. So it's very difficult to turn that back. And even we have mentioned a lot about protection, but that is not enough. We have to regenerate the life forces in nature. So the Sangha in its traditional way, the order of the monks and nuns, is also quite a conservative, not only symbol but reality. But that is what we call engaged Buddhism. So we have to do more than only protect. We have to go out and change and transform. And that is an enormous challenge with a background of centuries, the wrong direction. So that is that is where spirituality comes in also, that if you don't have some kind of spark of hope or perspective on change or optimistic vision of the future, it's very hard to believe that we can solve the problems. And that can also be quite illusionary, especially because I think the role of religions is also completely underdeveloped vis-a-vis the challenges we are having to tackle. So the role of religion also is far behind what it should be. So like rights of nature and earth trusteeship, it is these are kind of legal arrangements to enable transformation and regeneration. And then now, for example, you talked about climate change and so on. You have, because biodiversity agreements that, how they call it, 1/3 of the earth will have to be protected area before 2030. Yeah. Now, the danger of the concept of protection is that that will be protected with the gun. And indigenous people will be chased out. So protection can also be interpreted in different ways. Protection is not enough. So this protection has to be filled, and that is the fantastic thing of the tree ordination as a means of protection, that it is completely peaceful. So how can we protect peacefully and enable transformation? That is our challenge.
Yes, thank you. I know that 30 by 30 is protect 30% of the world, protect 30% of the land, protect 30% of the oceans. What's wrong with 100%? That kind of bothers me a bit. The other thing, as you point out, is that how is it going to be protected? Like in the oceans now, the new law of oceans allows deep water mining. Whether or not they have the technology to do it is another matter, but it allows it. So you're right. These agreements always have in the past depended on their, or now depend very much on the self-interest of the wealthy, of the rich, really to the expense of the poor. The poor get poorer, the rich get richer. I mean, how many billionaires are now in the world? And how many poor people, people who are really lackers, those numbers are growing. Not so many billionaires, but a whole lot of poor people. In fact, it's created food crises in many areas. But anyway, no, I agree. I think it's one of the things that really is important, I think, to some degree on the rights of Mother Earth is that one can actually, in some countries, one can actually bring a lawsuit to stand in, as a guardian ad litem, if you want, when there's some way in terms of protecting the earth, filing lawsuits to keep bad things from happening. And that has happened in a couple of areas, a couple of places. I think Ecuador for one. But it's an interesting phenomenon. I think that more and more people are, in fact, adopting the view that they are part of the web of life and that humanity itself is a threatened species. And that the youth in particular are taking it in their hands, Greta Thunberg and others, and really emphasizing that it's their future that they're toying with. It's their lives, and it's the lives of their children and grandchildren. I mean, if we're facing catastrophic climate crisis now, what's it going to be like in 10 years from now unless they act very quickly? What's it going to be like by 2050? I mean, people will probably survive, but it's going to be extremely
Yeah, that's
painful.
one of the things of trusteeship, is that in fact, the rights are there to enable responsibility. In fact, the responsibility is first, and that's why you need the rights, because without rights, you cannot be responsible. But to put the rights first, also rights of the earth, it is a kind of completely human concept. Van der Shiva, she said the human rights emerge from the rights of nature. Well, normally it's like, oh, now human beings are going to give rights to nature. It's no, these rights of nature are already implied in nature, and our rights emerge from that, but are completely alienated from it over the centuries. So we have to reconnect that and emphasize also responsibilities and duties first, in fact.
Mhm. But the challenge of doing that is that there's a lot of people that benefit from ignoring all of that, and so trying to find the ways of empowering people to take on that responsibility, or to recognize how to work. Sometimes you have to work within the system to change it. And for example, I'm really impressed. Fortunately, I'm blanking on her name, but in the US, a lot of people say that, well, evangelical Christianity, the right-wing Christianity, is one of the challenges because it emphasizes humans. But there is a scientist based in Tennessee. Her first name is Catherine. I apologize, I can't think of her last name. She is an evangelical Christian, and she is a scientist, and she is looking at climate change, and she's looking at things like the scientific impact of mountaintop removal from mining, and using she's managed to find ways of connecting very conservative interpretations of the Christian Bible with the impact of this kind of mining and kind of destruction of nature that it has. Somebody put the name out, Catherine Hayhoe, out of Texas. Thank you. So she's really impressive in how she's getting some people that to use their core beliefs in new ways and thinking about the impact it has on them. And that mountaintop removal, the mining, actually is destroying the lives of the people who are doing it, who live there and who do most of the labor. And so she's able to work in ways of showing how the science does not contradict the teachings in the Bible, and yet how do we then use that to make change and to empower the local people there? They're not indigenous, but they're very much at a disadvantage to the mining companies, and to help them reclaim their own lives and find livelihoods that are not destructive. And to me, it's that goal of finding livelihoods that are not destructive that certainly the monks in Thailand are working hard at, thinking you can't just say protect the forest, don't cut down the forest anymore. If people are caught in a material world where they're caught in a cycle of debt, they need to cut down the forest to be able to plant more, to get more money, to try to get out of debt, and it creates this awful cycle. So the monks are trying to say, how do we find them different sources of livelihood that do not involve destruction of the forest, destruction of nature, and can help get them out of this cycle of debt, and then and thereby challenge the very capitalist nature of how they've been living, which is not how they traditionally have lived for years. So it's a web. I mean, it very much is a interconnected web. The Buddhists describe that spiritually, but economically and socially and politically, that's very complex and very difficult to challenge. And I always am enthusiastic and excited when I hear of people that try to take this on, sometimes working within the system and taking it on. It's, we're in a difficult position, but it requires doing this fast and doing it more and supporting those that are trying.
Yes, one of our participants, apparently the name of that lady is Catherine Hayhoe from Texas. So thank you for your input. Elaine Caldwell. Yes, it is interesting that a lot of those comments that you made, Susan, really resonate. I was a judge in a tribunal in Mexico with regard to a project that they have called Tren Maya. It was a Garn tribunal, and some of the testimonies we heard really talk about the identification of indigenous peoples and their land, their environment, really, their total environment. If I'm going to try and translate it because I did it in Spanish, but let me give it a shot. The jungle lives. Each tree lives. Each cenote, each lake, each river live. The forest is a collective being of all the lives, the environment, the biodiversity, the fields of corn, the insects, the bees, the bats, the persons, individual and communities, and then the pueblo and the Mayan peoples in their collectivity. The earth lives, the maize lives, the corn lives, and it feeds the life of the forest, as it does the lives of the pueblo of the peoples. There is no pueblo, there is no indigenous peoples without corn, and there is no corn without the Mayan peoples. Without the fields, without the earth. This relation with the earth is not just a material, but a spiritual relation. It expresses itself in the song, in the dance, in ceremonies, and in words. And the words also, the language presents lends life to the culture and knowledge of the ancestors. The language also lives and is nurtured by the earth. I'll stop there because it really kind of got awkward, but I think you get the idea. I hope that there is a collective identity, an individual identity as well, between the earth and indigenous peoples, and that is a very close spiritual relationship. It can't be broken. That you can try to displace people, but when we were there, I was talking to this gentleman who offered some testimony, and I told him, well, in a way you won because you're not going anywhere. They're going to be there, and they're going to tough it out. They're going to do what they can to resist this mega project that the Mexican government is imposing on them. So I don't know. I think it's really important to make that identification, because I think that's the kind of identification that we all have to have. I don't know. We're approaching. I don't have any questions anymore. So anyway, closing remarks from people would be very appropriate. Is there some things that you think we should have talked about, or things that we need to think about? Or I'll start with Hans. Or maybe you can tell us what you think. Well, any thoughts you might have on our discussion.
I think that one of the most hope-giving sectors is the organic agriculture, which is now called the regenerative agriculture. Also there you have a lot of resistance and chemical industry who takes over the agriculture sector. But in principle, there is the most opportunity, the best opportunity to transform back the earth to a healthy earth. Because good agriculture is not extractive, but adds on to, and if it's integrated in healthy landscapes, regenerative landscapes, then it is a way to bring back the natural fertility of the earth. So I think apart from protection, which is needed, of course, in the first place, but beyond that, we have to make proactive progress in cultivating the earth and being in partnership with the earth and bringing healthy food to the people, and that is also economically viable. That is the basis of all economy is the agriculture. Well, of course, now it's so overrun by technology and infrastructure, and so but still that is the most hope-giving sector where we can gradually win back the sacredness of the earth.
No, that's very true. Part of the discussions of the UNFCCC is agriculture, but it's been dominated by Monsanto and the major seed producers and Safeways of the world. But there is a growing awareness that 70% of the world is fed by small producers, by producers that grow for their families and sell their surplus at local markets, or take it into the cities to sell it at local markets there. That's 70% of the world, and that's not going to. What we're trying to do is make sure that that continues to exist. We need a sustainable agriculture, and that is sustainable. And it's these mega farms and these tangerine plantations and whatever are really destructive of the earth.
Well, that's something that the monks in Thailand are certainly working on as well. And one of the monks I work with in Nan province in the north, he has worked to create a cooperative among the farmers in his region. So you get individual farmers with small plots of land, and he supports them in growing without the use of artificial chemicals, small scale. But then if they pool their resources, he realized there's a particular kind of squash. It looks somewhat like a pumpkin that's unique to that area. And he's managed to market it in Bangkok. And the individual farmers 700 kilometers north of Bangkok can't get the squash to Bangkok. But if they pool together and once a month or maybe more frequently during growing season, they get a truck, somebody agrees to transport it. They've created instructions for people in Bangkok of how to eat this squash because they're not familiar with it. And he managed to get, at the time, it was 2019, I think, or maybe a little earlier, the Minister of the Interior came up, who oversees forestries. Most of this province of Nan is National Forest Reserve land. So the farmers don't actually have rights to use it. They can be kicked off at any time, although historically they've been there. He managed to get this minister to come up and grant the farmers in this cooperative permission to be growing there because they also benefit more than anyone else from taking care of the land and the forest. And he nationally recognized this area. So that's the kind of movement in trying to expand. Start small, you've got these farmers, get them to grow without chemicals, minimize their destruction of the forest, but help them make a living from it, and then help them have the rights to do it and recognize the value of doing so. So I think they're steps very not fast enough. We need a lot more steps like this, but it's encouraging to me the steps that you're talking about, Alberto, the kinds of attitudes that Hans is describing is very, very encouraging if we can keep expanding it.
No, that's true. I think part of the growing employment is really in alternative energy. The installation of solar panels, I think, has been really highly employable for people who leave their destructive jobs and like coal mining in Tennessee and start installing solar panels throughout their jurisdiction. I think the Navajo are installing solar panels on each Hogan. I don't know, they live in Hogans, not really in a town, but the traditional people live in Hogans, and so they're installing solar panels so that they have communication with them through a cell phone or something, so that people can see how they're doing and bringing them food and things. So it's and they're also expanding to a wider solar farm because they're already hooked into the grid, so they can sell their electricity into the solar grid. So there are steps, there are promising employment practices that need to be encouraged and expanded. I don't know. I think we're kind of running out of time. Maybe Darcy could.
Yeah, I was just before I do my official wrap up, personally as an audience member, as you all spoke in some of the countries I know and some of the proverbs I've heard, but one of the things that always strikes me is, and God knows where I heard it, proverb in some great little place, that awareness precedes meaningful choice. So a lot about what we're doing is about awareness. And just as Alberto, when I said, over to you, Alberto, when you were the moderator, I would say to the audience, over to you, audience, right? What could we do? I made myself a little list of things, pragmatic, small, but within my realm, right, that I could start addressing, not just thinking about, not just pondering, but actually doing. So I want to personally thank you for that. It was really an interesting exchange. I'll follow up with some of you later, maybe with some questions. But as we wrap up, because I know we have, technology is great, but when it ends, it ends. There's no, let's chit chat for a while at the end. So I wanted to thank, one thing, Hans mentioned Vandana Shiva, and she is now the head, she's been involved with us for years, but is now the head of our International Council and works with us on our annual forum. All of those details and all of the past events, as is today, will be available on our website. So I wanted to thank, obviously, the three of you, but all of our listeners and contributors. And our next eco-justice event will be on Thursday, December 14th, and it's entitled Planetary Grief and Species Extinction. And the full details of that will be posted next week on the TOU website, templeofunderstanding.org. The featured presenters for that session will be Professor Larry Rasmussen, the author of The Planet You Inherit, Ariana Bennett, Anishinaabe member of the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Ontario, Canada, and faculty member at the University of Alberta, and Teokeshin Ghost Horse, who's a member of the Cheyenne River Lakota Nation of South Dakota, and founder and executive producer of First Voices Radio. So those will be, that's our next, about a month. But I want to thank each of you. I wish, as I said, that we were live and we could just go get a cup of coffee and continue, because I have questions for each of you to follow up. So the good news, bad news about technology. We can reach more people, but when we end, we end. So I want to thank all of our speakers today. I enjoyed meeting you. I'm going to go out and get that book. I'm going to check out that PBS documentary. And I think I'll get the book in English, not Thai. Our Peace Corps volunteers could probably read it in Thai. I cannot. But thank all of you so much for amplifying the Temple of Understanding. And I think this call was one of those. It wasn't just about faith. It was the nature of the conversation, the level of the interaction, and the fact that there is faith. And so thank you again, all of you. We'll see all of you, I hope, plus a few more on December 14th. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
for
you,
what
thank
do.
you.
You,
Thank you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.